Modernism begins in the late 19th century, and we've actually talked about three really important texts that kind of inspire it, and that was the texts of Freud, the texts of Darwin, and the texts of Karl Marx. All of them colluded into a new imagination for what society and culture could look like. And in early modernism, people really focused on those elements, the ideas, because all three in some ways were basically suggesting that perhaps there was another governing authority to life than the existence of God, or the existence of a higher power, or the existence of something that was organized and structured like a God found in religious ideologies and texts. So this is kind of percolating in a lot of Western society in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Then we have two really vital and cataclysmic events that shape what we come to know as high modernism. And the first is World War I. World War I, which takes place between 1914 and 1918, shatters mostly Europe. And it was devastating. It was the most depleting war in terms of human life that Europe had ever seen. Mainly because it was so total. There were so many nations participating in the war. And the matchup was rather equitable, meaning there was a lot of death on both sides. This is also, the first war with tanks and trenches, and there was a real devastation because of the technology that had also been utilized for this war. Many artists kind of combined with the theories that were being extolled through Darwin, Marx, and Freud, which had already been establishing this idea that perhaps there is a different kind of truth other than religious truth. Well, after all of this devastation, which had logically been rationalized by these nations, many people just felt, how could there be any rational governance for such cataclysm, for such devastation? So many artists started to kind of declare this idea that there was no truth at all to reality and human existence, and that we all were basically running around just as animals with no particular purpose or function or outcome. This is the birth of a concept called nihilism. And maybe you've heard of nihilism. It's basically, there is no governance to truth or to the universe. We are merely players in chaos, and there's really no purpose to living. So they would actually argue that suicide is the only logical conclusion. But despite that, they just don't care. And we see this kind of nihilism being reflected in a lot of the art, especially in the 20s, an art form that we call Dada, which in its very nature is all about pointlessness. Like, there's no point to anything, so let's just screw around and just make art that makes no sense. But this is where we also get the birth of things like collage and eventually what we call absurdist film. It's really interesting, actually. This is Marcel Duchamp putting the urinal into the museum space, um, things of this nature. Like, who gives a crap? Just do whatever because nothing makes any sense and everything has no meaning. So this is a radical, radical perspective that has never been uh, displayed in human existence. So you can imagine kind of the impact it has on everything, every visual form, every aspect of human life, and in particular, theater. So this nihilism, of course, is very unsettling because there's many people that don't want to commit suicide and they want to feel like there perhaps is another way to negotiate the meaninglessness in the universe. And this is the birth of existentialism as a concept. And existentialism, which kind of is born between World War I and World War II, and is kind of most articulated, or I believe most clearly articulated by Jean-Paul Sartre, kind of states that, yeah, there is no meaning to the universe, but because we do have free will and we do have reasoning, we must try to construct for ourselves our own sense of truth. And this is kind of where, in many ways, we still exist today. We're very inspired by this philosophy because it makes us feel a little better that we have a sense of free will, despite the fact that there is no universal truth, right? And again, this is just a philosophy. Not everyone embodies it, of course. There are many people who still believe in the concept of universal truth, which is kind of espoused in any kind of religious philosophy or any kind of way of life like Zen Buddhism or Hinduism. You get the drill, right? But there are many people who don't identify with any religion at this point in the world. And a lot of those people embody existential principles, that we possess free will and we can kind of find our own sense of truth in order to govern our lives in the best way that we see fit. Through these two ideas of nihilism, which inspires the more sensible existentialism, we also have another perspective, and that is absurdism. And we mainly see absurdism materialized in art. But it is a philosophy very similar to existentialism where it purports that, yeah, there is no meaning in the universe. And it's silly to think that we actually do truly possess free will because we are constrained by a lot of the institutions in which we reside, like government and dominant ideologies that we might call hegemonies, and other institutions like even college, right, that kind of governs some aspects of your life. The perceptions of love, the perceptions of what it means to be a good person, like these are all institutions in a way. And so what absurdism acknowledges is that, well, okay, we have some degree of free will, but isn't it mostly a ruse? So considering that there is a meaninglessness to life, and considering that we really don't have full agency, let's just live in the world, let's stop trying to find any sense of resolve to the world, and enjoy what we can.